Thanks, Kim. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the panel. My name's Jane Douglas. I'm going to be your host, and I'm joined today by three very special guest panelists. First of all, we have Emily Teng. Emily, hi. Tell us about yourself.
Hi, I'm Emily. I'm a senior narrative game designer on Magic the Gathering. I have worked on sets such as Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, March of the Machine, and Bloomburrow, and most recently Duskmoor and House of Horrors.
Awesome. Our second panelist is Amanda DeSanto. Amanda, hi, welcome. Tell us about yourself.
Hello, thanks so much, Jane. I'm Amanda, Senior Manager of Narrative Design for Hasbro Board Games. I lead a team of writers who create themes, narratives, and game content for games from Life in Reterra to Monopoly to Trivial Pursuit and Candyland. We also write the onboarding and rules experiences, so I think of us as the consumer's world builders and travel guides.
And last but not least, we have our panelist, Andriana Lozano. Andriana, welcome. Hi, tell us about yourself.
Hi, I'm Andriana. I'm a writer at Archetype Entertainment, where I work on crafting missions and dialogue for the upcoming sci-fi RPG video game Exodus.
Very cool. All right, we've got three roles, three careers, all centered on narrative design, which we're talking about today, and different facets of narrative design. So what I'd like to ask you is, can you speak on your background, your career path? How did you get to be where you are today as a narrative designer? And let's start with Andriana, if you're okay with that.
I actually started out at the University of Texas at Austin, where I studied journalism and creative writing. So writing's always been a huge part of my background, something I'm very passionate about. I was fortunate enough during my senior year at college to get an internship at Archetype Entertainment, where I had an incredible experience and my first real introduction to the realm of video games. My mentors really helped me grow as a writer, and I became very, very passionate about the industry. Following college, I was lucky enough to be hired on as a full-time writer at Archetype, and that's where I've been ever since.
Emily, how does that compare to your background? How did you come into narrative design?
I think I started out similar, but I took a much more circuitous path to get there. I went to college for creative writing at Texas A&M, actually. Hello, fellow Texan. Once I graduated, I realized I had to get a job, and creative writing didn't exactly have very many direct opportunities for employment afterwards. I ended up getting a job as QA for medical software. That led to a position as QA in games, so like a games tester. And then I got interested in writing for video games as well. So I started doing writing for some small indie games, and then a position opened up at Wizards of the Coast for a concept writer for Magic the Gathering. I was able to take that experience from writing for those indie games to get that position, and that eventually became a full-time thing. That is where I've been ever since.
I love that. And Amanda, how about you? What's your background? How's your career brought you to where you are today?
Similarly, I went to undergraduate school for creative writing, English, and actually political science. And then I focused my graduate work in fiction writing. So I very early knew that I wanted to do something with creative writing, but it was the same experience. Where do I take this? So for about 10 years, I freelanced and I taught. And I loved that because in teaching, I met other writers, folks who were either learning English as a language for a first time or were up and coming creative writers. In terms of freelance writing, I did everything from art reviews to reading fiction submissions for an experimental literature magazine. So it was very cool to see all the different spheres of where writing can take you during that time. And then 11 and a half years ago, I was laid off from my teaching job, and it was the best thing that could have happened because I landed at Hasbro. And that's where I really started to learn about how storytelling can be injected into games. And similarly to the other folks on this panel, that's where I learned about and started to work in narrative design.
So the three of you, you work on these brands, these properties that have a lot of fans, obviously a lot of players. It's often a lot of legacy. At the same time, you're working on commercial projects. How, as narrative designers, do you approach balancing serving those fans, those players, but also the needs of, a business?
So for Magic the Gathering, I mean, it's a game with such a huge legacy. It's been going for like 30 years. It has so much lore behind it. And the part that's really easy for us on the world building team is getting lost in those details. Like we're all working on Magic because we love the lore, we love the world building, and nothing gets us more excited than all the little Easter eggs, all the tiny little details that make a world feel really lived in and really intricate, but is not necessarily going to be easy to sell to a wide audience or like immediately hook fans. So then the balance is fighting our natural urge to just like dive right into the details and go, but wait, because this faction is against this faction and they interact in this way, that's why it's so awesome and you'll love it, is to like take our thinking up to a higher level, like the more top level pitch, I guess, and being able to talk about the world that way and communicate it that way. And it's sort of like you have to sell it a little internally, so that other teams can sell it externally as well and make the game as exciting for a wide audience as it is for you.
Andriana, what's your experience like of balancing those kind of fan like needs, or I guess with the game not out yet, it's anticipating like players anticipating fans and making a commercial success?
Yeah, as you've just pointed out, we're in a bit of a unique circumstance because Exodus is an entirely new IP franchise. We don't have a established fan base. We are kind of in the process, working with marketing to build a fan base. And obviously we anticipate that fan base once we launch. So it is a little bit different, but we certainly do look at other properties that are very popular among our anticipated fan base. You have the games like Dragon Age, like Mass Effect, these huge sci-fi RPG experiences that are very heavy on narrative. We look at what fans really loved about those experiences, and we try to bring that to life in our own game. I personally believe that the best way to make a good narrative experience in the game is just to really tell a good story that the writers feel passionate about, because we really think that passion is going to translate and be reciprocated by the players. A good story is it's universal. So that's really what we focus on.
Nice. And are you at the point where you can get kind of early player feedback? What stage are you at with that?
Yeah, we've been slowly getting feedback, a lot of feedback, from internally, from the team, from Wizards. We've also had some play testing, and the reception's been really positive. One of the narrative points that we really pride ourselves on is we are a companion game. The player is going to be accompanied by this cast of, really interesting and diverse companions with their unique personalities and unique abilities. And the reception to that has been incredibly positive so far, which I'm really excited about. I love our companions so much.
That's so cool. Amanda, how does that contrast to your experience at Hasbro?
I love this question. I love, again, as you said, how the answer is slightly different depending on whether it's a new game or something like Magic. For Hasbro games, we've got Monopoly, which is about 90 years old. And then we have something like Hero Quest from the late 80s. Two completely different consumer spectrums, but both very passionate communities that bring a lot of experience and knowledge about those brands to us. So I think my solid answer to your question is, if our consumers are at the center, as they always are for us, that means we're serving the fans, that means we'll be serving the business. So for example, if we change anything in one of these beloved games, like Monopoly, for example, we need to find the balance between looking at consumer insights to know what is truly beloved, what can we never change. When we have a token vote and we get rid of something like the thimble, we have a lot of responses to that. So those are the things we know about the brand. We also know that after 90 years, we've got to change the way you learn how to play the game. When folks play Monopoly incorrectly, their gameplay lasts 4 hours and they don't love it. So we find ways to drip feed information about games and brands that people think they know everything about, so that it will ultimately make their experience better. And I could talk about this for hours, but in a nutshell, Monopoly is a great example.
I mean, do you have like super vocal fans of Monopoly, or is it more like going in and finding those insights, or do they come to you with the insights?
It's all of the above. We definitely look for the insights, but we have fans, whether they come through to us on social media Or in regular play sessions, we watch families play. That's one of my favorite things about my job, watching people play and listening to the language they use to talk about their experience. But in terms of fans that are, for our strategy game, something like Hero Quest, we have decades of conversations on the internet, stories shared by fans. And if we listen and read and pay attention, we learn everything we need to know really quickly.
All right, Emily, with Magic the Gathering, by comparison, how do you go out and seek that kind of insight from your players? Do they come to you, or how do you learn about what they're thinking?
So we do send out like formal surveys where we ask people questions. Those can be quantified. And then, we kind of obsessively go on Reddit and other social media to get an idea of how people are reacting to our sets, our worlds. Um, I find that that's like a really good way of just getting an idea of the sentiment of the community as a whole.
Okay, question for the group now. In narrative design, in your particular field, question for everyone, what is it that's got you most excited about what's going on in narrative design? And let's give that question to Amanda, if you don't mind.
So what I'm really excited about with narrative design right now is really about what's happening with storytelling in general. Stories are eternal. They've been part of human experience since before they were even written down. So today, what we get to watch with narrative design are all the experimental ways people continue to engage with storytelling. I love the idea of folks coming up with their own games, their own narratives. It's a reason I love a game like D&D, where you can dive in as the dungeon master and decide what experience your friends and family are about to sit down for, and they could have no idea until you tell them. So what I'm excited about with narrative design, I think, more on the philosophical end, is just that we continue to tell stories and find ways for us to enjoy experiencing them together.
I love getting philosophical on that. And I suppose it never occurred to me before, but people playing Monopoly are kind of telling their own stories as they play.
Their own fantasy of wealth, absolutely. Everybody's got their own favorite board space and whatever they would buy with the $1 million they make. So for sure.
How about you, Adriana? In narrative design in video games, what's been exciting for you?
I'm super passionate about what we're working on with Exodus. I think we're telling a story that is, in some ways it is timeless. And in other ways, it's very new. It's something that hasn't been tried before. And I'm really excited to see the reception to that.
Adriana, for you, what's the difference between approaching like an interactive narrative versus, a creative writer writing a story? How do you go about that?
With interactive media, it's so much fun. Our narrative is really focused a lot on choices. The player is going to have to make choices that have a huge impact on their experience, on their world. And we want to give them as much freedom to kind of take the story in the direction they want to see. When I was first starting out in this role, that was like a huge thing to try to wrap my head around, because it's like you're not just telling a singular story. You're trying to think about what are all of the different experiences, all of the different choices that a player might want to make in any particular circumstance, in any particular conversation, and how can we give the freedom to realize those choices and realize the impact of those choices. So it was a lot of trial and error, a lot of practice, a lot of looking at other choice-based games, but I think we have something that's really cool and really unique with, really impactful choices. And it's super exciting.
I bet. And how do you stay on top of like that non-linear narrative with all those choices? How do you keep that all in your head?
Yeah. It's a lot. It is a lot of information to keep in your head. It's a lot of time and practice and, writing the material, reading the material. We're very fortunate to have an incredible tools team at Archetype who is able to craft, this specialized narrative tool for us to use so that we can actually see the way that dialogue and scenes branch, based on player decisions. So that's been super helpful.
Awesome. Emily, over to you. What's exciting in your field of narrative design? What kind of things influence you working on Magic the Gathering?
So, Magic is a card game. It's probably the most non-linear storytelling format you can get. And so what I really love, what's been really exciting for me, is how we take advantage of that non-linearity to experiment with storytelling. Magic has its web fiction, it has like the stories that get posted online and everyone can read. And then the exciting part for me is how we can translate that onto cards and how people will experience the story then when they open up a pack and they see those moments that they read about as well.
Amazing. Okay, moving on slightly, I'd like to talk about if someone watching this wants to get into narrative design professionally, what's the best kind of like personal like preparation they can do? What would you look for if you were recruiting someone like yourself? What would you
Sure.
look for on their
I'm gonna
sort
get
of
philosophical
portfolio?
again. I think it's all about reading and experiencing stories yourself. And learning, never stop learning. So the more you read, the more different kinds of stories you read. I don't care if it's a children's picture book or a novel or nonfiction. What you're doing is taking in language and you're becoming part of whatever club you're reading about. Basically, what you're doing is learning the language of that particular player, consumer, fan, and then you'll internalize it and know it. So the more you experience stories this yourself, the better you are at creating them for anybody and about anybody. So reading and learning, and it's fun. It's fun. Why would you stop reading?
Yeah, I suppose especially in video games, which is, a very technical industry, it helps for a narrative designer to also have like a technical skill set as well as creative writing.
Absolutely. That's something that is a huge help. If you're interested, in nonlinear storytelling, being familiar with branching narratives is super important. And then there's lots of great resources for learning about that kind of writing online. But yeah, also speaking to the technical side, if you want to learn how to work with a game engine, that's going to be a huge help. Learning how to work with Unreal, for example, and having that expertise is definitely going to give you an edge in the industry.
And would you say a lot of that can be self-taught? There's a lot of material out there.
Absolutely. There's so much material out there. YouTube is a great resource. I mean, people have put together incredible tutorials all out there for free. Just, yeah, take some time out of your day, learn a new skill, and that's really going to help you grow.
Emily, in your experience on Magic the Gathering, is everyone engaging with the lore, or is there a set of players who are really about the numbers and nothing else?
The one place everyone engages with the games is the cards. So then what we try and do is just make the cards exciting as game pieces. So that means making sure the art that comes through is very exciting, very cool to look at, unique from each other so that you can like distinguish clearly when you're looking at a small piece of cardboard, like what each card is, so that you know what the mechanics do. You're not getting confused during gameplay. Giving them fun names too. Like that's where we can, everyone's going to see like the art and the names. And then the names is where we can do fun things like nodding to the world building that we've set up with like mentions of specific places, specific characters, but then having some just like more generic and fun things also, like a spell that just says beat down, and then let's say you play it with a living gingerbread cookie, then suddenly you've got this fun story of like, well, my gingerbread cookie is going to beat down your dinosaur or something like that.
I love that. And I suppose on a single Magic the Gathering card, you're doing this really intense, like super condensed storytelling because you've got so little space and so few words.
Yeah, and that's also an opportunity for us to hide the Easter eggs and all the callbacks to old lore too, for people who are really invested. Like this creature might be a callback to an existing creature from a really old block or something. Or we can take 3 cards and tell a 3-stage story of one character's growth across them.
And speaking of the art, you mentioned the art a second ago. As a narrative designer, at what point does your collaboration start with the artists, with the visual artists?
So we don't actually work with individual artists. We work with the art directors there will be a world building lead and an art director who work together from the very start, and they take the set all the way from the vague idea of maybe we have, I don't know, a demon monster world, all the way to, well, now we've got art and we've got flavor text and we have the whole package of the card coming together.
Amanda, on the topic of like visual art collaboration with the artists, how does it work for you as a narrative designer? And the art that appears in Hasbro board games?
We have a magical partnership with our creative development team. And the way we work varies brand to brand. So I'm going to go back to the iceberg theory, where if we're making a card game that has a really fun theme, for example, we had something come out recently called Trader Tots, where we took it's a battle join sides card game where you can either be Team Tots or Team Fries. And I'm sure everybody in this group has their opinion. I'm Team Fries, and now I've just unmade at least 50 friends.
Yeah, we don't really get tots here, so I'm kind of fries by default, but please continue.
Okay. All right, awesome, love it. So for a game like that, my team will build a rich narrative. We might even name some of the characters that appear, but that stuff doesn't necessarily appear in the final game. So back to what Emily said about using a card name, you can just take 2 words and give a card an amazing message. And then my team will work with, again, our fantastic creative development team, who will just build beautiful artwork that brings the entire world to life. So 2 words that fit perfectly with an image that tells a huge story, you've done it. And that answers your previous question, where we were talking about how deep do you get with the lore. When you have a really good card name and a beautiful, rich illustration, players can make that story come to life as much as they want, which is usually ideal.
Mm-mm. And with that kind of effect, you're also drawing them into the lore, inviting them to, care about it even more.
Right, exactly.
All right. Does anyone else want to weigh in on tots versus fries before we move on?
Tots, absolutely.
Okay, tots from Emily.
I've got to say fries.
Okay, Andriana with fries there. Andriana, how are you working with game artists, or do you come together early on or later on?
We're working with artists, at every stage of the process, from the initial broad story pitch, you're trying to get concept art so you can have a visual idea of what things are going to look like, and as the story develops, you're going to have art for, every mission, every character, and that can actually kind of dictate the story. It's a back and forth process of being like, hey, this concept art really reframes the scene in a way I didn't think about before, and seeing what you can do with that. Also as a writer, I work a lot with our cinematics department. We're not just writing these scenes, we are bringing them to life with incredible animations and incredible, so it's a collaboration on everything for sure. And we have a great team. And I think we're going to create an incredible visual experience for the player.
Just to change speed a little bit, I'd like to talk about your careers, your paths to reaching where you are as narrative designers. I'd like to talk about challenges. What have you found challenging in developing your career in becoming a narrative designer? If anyone has any thoughts on that.
I think for sure one of the challenges in starting to figure out how to be a creative writer, even if you want to go into narrative design, there are so many things to write about, so many voices you can write in, so many tools in your, the proverbial toolbox for writing, that sometimes it can be really hard to stop and say, this is the voice I should use. These are the story elements I should use. It can be a challenge to quiet all the voices of past stories you've read, all the things hone in, and just really work on one clear narrative thread for any given game. So for example, if we're going to add an expansion to something like Hero Quest, and I bet Emily feels this way too with Magic. Don't let me speak for you, but you can go in so many directions and you can get so excited about that sometimes you can't stop yourself and focus in. That I think is one of the biggest challenges. And it's a good thing because it's a challenge of passion, but it can cause you to lose focus sometimes.
What about you, Emily? What have you found challenging in your career path? What's challenging about narrative design for you?
Being able to separate myself from all the existing lore that has come before.
Okay. Unfortunately, we're nearly out of time for today. So I have one final question for you, if you would. If you had one piece of advice for someone who was pitching a game, for example, to the Hasbro Women Innovators of Play Challenge, what would that one piece of advice for their pitch be?
I love this question. So you've created a fantastic game. You love it. I think the best thing you can do next is tell us the why. Why will the particular audience that you made this game for love it? And the best way to tell us is with a really pithy, exciting name and tagline that leaves us, it's completely unforgettable. And then when you have really intuitive, clean onboarding, when people can get into the game quickly, that helps a lot too. So tell us the why. Why will people love it?
All right, why? Clean onboarding. How about you, Andriana? What's your best piece of advice for someone who's pitching a game?
Pitch something that you are personally super passionate about. Your passion is what's going to really shine through and hook players and hook the people you're pitching it to. So, when you're thinking about the story you want to tell a story that's really meaningful to you, that you're passionate about.
All right, passion. Finally, Emily, last but not least, what's your piece of advice for someone who is pitching a game?
Passion. Like, how are you going to get someone to fall in love with something if you don't love it yourself?
Perfect. Even more passion. Okay, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much to our guests for joining us for this panel. You've been amazing. I hope everyone at home has found this interesting, inspiring. I know I have.